Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about rose anemones. Here's a sample rose anemone which has been in my aquarium for several years now. And with rose anemones you want to have a salinity between 1.023 and 1.026. What's most important is not the salinity number itself, but the consistency. So you want to keep the consistency of your salinity with these organisms, as anemones are very sensitive to salinity changes. So in my tank we started out with one rose anemone, and the anemone has split many times. I think over a period of 5 or 6 years I have about 14 or 15 of these now in my aquarium, and you can see several of them here. These all came from one rose anemone that I originally purchased from a friend of mine. And you can see with the rose anemone, one of the things that they particularly like is they like to set their feet deep in trenches. So this is a popular spot in my tank because it's what you're seeing here is a lot of dead skeleton from a Monipora plate coral that has grown over several years. And Moniporas tend to grow towards the light, and once they grow higher on the bottom, there's no light, so that it dies on the bottom and just becomes a skeletal structure. So the rose anemones love this because it has a lot of deep openings for them to set their feet way down inside. So to care for these animals, one thing is critical is not to have too much flow. If you have a lot of flow directly on the anemone, what'll happen is it'll become long and stringy, and you'll lose the fluorescence and the intricate coloring on the bubble tips. In fact, if you have too much flow and they suddenly, when they're in a form as you see here with the bubble tips will actually fly off the anemone. And you can see this occasionally with the clowns. If they're threatened, they'll aggressively shake and do a defensive posture, sometimes damaging the anemone, and the tips will occasionally become damaged. It's not a long-term thing. You know, if a tip is damaged, it just grows back. It's not a big concern. But the main point being, you don't want to blast these with a lot of flow. They'll move around a lot. Once they find their spot that they're happy in, they'll stay there for years. And just keep everything nice and consistent. Feed them occasionally, and they will split and grow as you've seen here. And you'll have more than you can handle if you take care of them properly. So when feeding the anemone, you have several options. They're not overly picky. I would avoid any sort of flake food, especially the real cheap flake food that may have phosphates in it. What I generally do is I buy frozen octopus from the market, and one piece of octopus will feed all 15 of these anemones for months, because octopus is a very dense, protein-rich food. So you make sure it's completely unfrozen. Cut off a very small section. Do not give it a piece that's too big. If you give it a piece that's too big, it'll expend a lot of energy trying to absorb that piece, and if it cannot absorb it, it'll end up spitting it out, and that could happen in the middle of the night, and it could blow around and land somewhere and foul your tank. So if you're in doubt, the smaller the piece the better. Other options, you can feed Reef-Roids. I assume most other types of food like that, they'll probably take mysis if you filter it, although I haven't tried that. Octopus and Reef-Roids works great for me, so that's what I recommend. I've had great results with that. If they're growing too much, in my case now, because I have so many rose anemones and they're starting to really overtake my tank, I have stopped feeding them entirely. I do have pretty extensive lighting. I have the new AI Hydra light, which has a lot of high par values, so I'm not too concerned about not feeding them. I will occasionally do some Reef-Roid feedings once in a while. So that's about it on the food. Do not try to move the anemone at all. Make sure you don't have any power heads or anything that the anemone can get stuck in. That generally is not a problem with these anemones. If you had a condylactis or another type of anemone, that can be a real problem. But these guys, they like the rocks. So if you put it on an intricate rock with a lot of deep crevices in an area that doesn't have a lot of flow, and you feed it, say once a month, with a very small piece of octopus or Reef-Roids, that type of food, you should be fine. So that's it. Good luck. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to comment, and I will try to respond. Thanks for watching.